All right. So we've got this stack of articles all about SARMs, and we're going to dive into those.
Okay.
And for anyone listening who's interested in more topics like this one, you can find more information on our website. It's publichealthlaw.net. So SARMs, right? Selective Androgen Receptor Modulators.
Yeah.
We're going to unpack what they are, what they
Yeah.
do, and I guess the most important thing is, do they actually live up to the hype?
Yeah. It's a really fascinating area, especially with all the discussion right now around, fitness and performance enhancement. And I think there's definitely a need for some clear and accurate information.
Absolutely. You want to know, are these compounds just a
Sure.
shortcut to getting jacked, or are they actually just a shortcut to trouble? Right.
Yeah.
So to start, can you
Yeah.
just break down for us what SARMs actually are? Because I know they're often compared to steroids, but it sounds like they're kind of,
More targeted. Yeah, that's the main difference, right? So think of the androgen receptors in your body like locks. And testosterone is kind of like the key that fits in those locks. And those receptors are mostly found in your muscles and bone tissue. SARMs are kind of like specially designed keys that only fit certain locks, primarily the ones related to muscle growth.
okay, that's actually a really good image. So instead
Feels
of testosterone being like a master key that unlocks everything, is SARMs are those keys that just open specific doors.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's where the theoretical appeal comes in.
Right.
By targeting that muscle growth more selectively, they might offer some of those same benefits that steroids do. So we're talking muscle gain, fat loss, but with a potentially reduced risk of all of those, widespread side effects that traditional steroids are infamous for.
Okay, so fewer downsides, at least
Mm.
in theory. Now, from what I was reading, there are a whole
Sure.
bunch of SARMs out there, each with their own supposed specialty. Can we talk about some of the popular ones? I kept seeing Osterine and Ligandrol
Yeah.
mentioned a lot.
Yeah, for sure. Those are two of the, most researched and talked about SARMs zosterine, also called MK2866, that one is, often used because people think it can prevent muscle loss, especially when you're trying to cut, right? Where you're trying to lose fat but keep all that muscle you've gained.
Okay, that makes sense. So if you're trying to get totally shredded, but you're worried
Yeah.
about, losing all your gains, Osterine might be something that you'd want to use. And then there's Ligandrol, right? Or LGD4033.
Sure.
I feel like that one's for people who are really serious about packing on size.
Yeah, you got Ligandrol is generally considered to be a lot more powerful than Osterine, especially when it comes to
That's
muscle growth and strength gains. And it's often used in bulking cycles where the goal is, to get as big as possible.
Okay, so Osterine is more about keeping the muscle you have, and Ligandrol is more about building new muscle. But even though they're supposed to be more targeted, are there still risks involved with SARMs? Because these articles are really emphasizing that. They're not just a free pass.
Oh, yeah, you're absolutely right. One of the big concerns with SARMs is testosterone suppression. So even though they're more selective than anabolic steroids, they can still really mess with your body's natural hormone production. And that's where post-cycle therapy, or PCT, is super important.
So it's not even just about what happens when you're taking them. It's about what you do afterward to help your body recover.
Exactly. Yeah. PCT is all about helping your body get back into balance, especially with your hormones. After you finish a SARM cycle, if you skip PCT, that can have some really bad consequences, especially for your hormones in the long run. We can talk more about the specifics of PCT later, but it's important to remember that using SARMs, it's not just like turning a light switch on and off. There's a whole recovery process involved.
Okay, that's a really important point. So even though they might seem like
Oh, yeah.
a gentler alternative to steroids, it's clear that SARMs come with their own, complexities and risk. We've got a lot more to cover. So
We'll continue this deep dive into SARMs in part 2. Right. It's really important to understand both sides of the coin, the good and the bad before you even think about using these things. There's a lot to consider.
yeah, for sure. And speaking of nuance, one thing that I kept seeing in these articles is this whole debate between SARMs and steroids. Why would someone even choose SARMs when steroids are a thing, right?
Right.
It seems like there's definitely a trade-off there.
Yeah, absolutely so. One of the biggest things that people like about SARMs is they seem to cause fewer side effects. And that goes back to what we were saying before about how they're more targeted. So they might be a little bit easier on your liver, heart, and prostate, especially compared to steroids.
Okay, so that's a big plus for SARMs,
Yeah.
but I'm guessing steroids still have their place. People still use them.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Especially if you're trying to get
Yeah.
the maximum amount of muscle growth possible. Steroids are just way more powerful. It's like comparing a handgun to a rocket launcher.
Okay.
But that power comes with a price. The steroids come with some pretty nasty side effects. And They're more likely to throw your hormones totally out of whack.
So it's kind of like a risk versus reward kind of thing.
Yeah,
SARMs might be a little gentler, but steroids will get you bigger,
exactly.
but potentially with worse consequences.
Right. And then there's the whole legal side of things, which just makes everything more complicated. Yeah, a lot of people say that SARMs are illegal, but it's not that simple. Like, they're definitely banned by all the major sports organizations, WADA, all those guys. And the rules about selling SARMs for people to use, those are kind of a gray area. It depends on where you live.
Okay, so it's not as easy as just going online and,
Yeah.
buying whatever you want. You have to do your research and know what the laws are wherever you are. Now, here's something that I found pretty interesting. It seems like SARMs aren't just for men. Is that right?
Yeah, that's right. More and more women are starting to use SARMs, but it's super important to be careful.
Okay, what makes it different for women?
Well, women are a lot more sensitive to androgens than men. And so using SARMs can increase the risk of virilization, which basically means developing male characteristics like a deeper voice or facial hair.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, that's definitely something to keep in mind. And are there certain SARMs that are better for women to use that might be less likely to cause those effects?
Yeah, Ostarine, the one we talked about before, that one is usually recommended for women because it's a little milder. But even then, dosage is extremely important. Women usually need to take a much smaller dose than men to avoid those side effects.
Right, it's a good reminder that even though these are often used for like fitness and looks,
Yeah.
you really have to think about your health first. Now, speaking of health, we have to talk about PCT, post-cycle therapy. It seems like a really important step, but I'm not totally clear on why.
So it all comes back to your hormones. Like we were saying before, SARMs can lower your natural testosterone production. And PCT is all about helping your body get those levels back to normal.
So it's not just about building muscle or losing fat. It's about keeping your hormones balanced.
Exactly. If you ignore PCT, you can have all sorts of problems, like low energy, mood swings, trouble sleeping, and even more serious health problems down the road because your hormones are all messed up.
Okay, yeah, that makes pretty clear why you shouldn't skip PCT. So what does a typical PCT protocol look like?
There are a few different ways to do it, and it really depends on the person and what SARMs they were using. But a lot of times it involves medications like Clomid or Nolvadex, which help your body start making more testosterone naturally.
So it's like you're giving your system a jump start after it's been slowed down. Are there any supplements that can help with recovery too?
Yeah, there are some, but it's important to remember that supplements aren't a replacement for actual medical advice. Some people like to use ZMA, which is zinc, magnesium, and vitamin B6, to help support their hormone levels. And there's also D-aspartic acid, although we're not totally sure how well it works yet.
So there are definitely options out there, but
Yep.
it sounds like the main point is that you should take PCTs seriously and talk to a doctor about it. Now let's talk about separating fact from fiction. These articles mentioned a lot of myths and misconceptions about SARMs.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of misinformation floating around, especially online.
So one myth that I saw was that SARMs are completely safe.
Yeah, that's just not true. They might be safer than steroids, but anything that messes with your hormones can cause side effects, and that includes SARMs.
Right, it's not a free pass. And another myth that I kept seeing was that you don't need to do PCT after using SARMs.
And as we've already talked about, that's definitely not true. Most SARMs will lower your testosterone levels, so you need PCT to get those levels back to normal and avoid any potential long-term problems. It's all about being smart and making healthy choices. And that means listen to the facts, not just what you read online or what your buddies tell you.
Absolutely, we've covered a lot of ground here. Everything from how SARMs actually work to why PCT is so important. And we've busted some of the most common myths about these compounds. But we're not done yet. We've still got more to talk about. So let's continue our deep dive into SARMs in part 3. All right, so let's wrap up our deep dive on SARMs. We've talked about a lot of stuff, like how they work and how to use them safely. Now, I want to go a little deeper on a few things that came up in these articles. One thing that I thought was interesting was this idea of stacking SARMs. Like, what does that even mean?
So stacking is basically just using a few different kinds of SARMs at the same time. The idea is that if you use a few different ones, you can kind of get a better overall effect because you're hitting different pathways in your body.
So it's kind of mixing your own custom blend of SARMs based on what you're trying to achieve.
Exactly. Yeah, some people stack them to get as much muscle growth as possible. Some people are more focused on losing fat. And some people want a bit of everything, like more strength, more endurance, and just looking better overall.
Right, so it depends on your individual goals.
Exactly.
But I'm guessing stacking SARMs can get pretty complicated.
Oh, yeah, definitely. It's not something you should just try on your own. You really need to know what you're doing, like how the different SARMs interact with each other, their half-lives, the potential side effects, and how those side effects might change when you combine different SARMs.
So this isn't something to just play around with.
No, absolutely not. If you're thinking about stacking SARMs, you should talk to someone who really knows what they're doing, someone who can help you figure out what's best for you.
Yeah, it's a good reminder that even though people talk about this stuff online all the time, you should always get advice from a real expert before you do anything. Okay, so another thing that I was curious about was adjusting the dosage of SARMs during a cycle. Why would someone need to do that?
Well, it's not like everyone reacts to SARMs the same way, right? People's bodies are different, your metabolism, your body composition, even how hard you train, all of that can affect how your body processes these compounds.
So it's basically like fine-tuning the dosage to get the best results for you.
Exactly. It's all about paying attention to how your body is responding and making adjustments if you need to get the most out of it and avoid any negative side effects.
Right, so it's not just about blindly following some plan. It's
Yeah.
about listening to your body
Exactly.
and making smart decisions based on how you're feeling.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, so before we finish up this deep dive, I want to go back to something that we've talked about a few times, which is how important it is to look at the science
Yeah.
when it comes to SARMs.
Absolutely. Yeah, there's so much information out there, and a lot of it is just wrong. Especially online, you have to be really careful about what you believe.
Exactly. So where can people find good information about SARMs?
Well, you can always start by looking at studies that have been published in real medical journals. And organizations like the World Anti-Doping Agency, they have some good information too, especially if you're an athlete. And of course, it's always a good idea to talk to your doctor or a qualified healthcare professional. They can give you the best advice for your specific situation.
Right. And anytime you see something online that sounds too good to be true, it probably is.
Yeah, I would be very skeptical of anything like that.
When it comes to your health, you can't be too careful. Do your research and talk to the experts.
Yeah, I agree completely.
So to wrap up our deep dive on SARMs, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I would say the most important thing to remember is SARMs can be really helpful, but they can also be dangerous if they're not used properly, so you really need to do your research. Talk to a doctor. And always put your health first.
Really good advice. Well, this has been a really interesting conversation. And I hope everyone listening feels like they know a lot more about SARMs now. And if you're interested in learning more about topics like this, you can visit our website. It's publichealthlaw.net. Thanks for joining us on the Deep Dives.